Welcome to This Explainer. Most of us think we've got the story of Jonah totally figured out. It's that classic Sunday school tale, right? A guy, a massive storm, a giant fish. But we're going to dive into the source text today. And let me tell you, what we're actually looking at is a brilliantly designed, highly sophisticated literary trap. It is literally packed with hidden asymmetries, clever wordplay, and these ancient echoes that build up to a completely unresolved ending. So let's just jump right in, because reading the text this way changes the whole shebang.
Right off the bat, there's this retroactive bombshell in the text that instantly shatters the pop culture myth about why Jonah ran away. I mean, we usually assume he was just, terrified to go to a dangerous enemy city. But the text gives us a totally different reality. Over in chapter 4, Jonah actually tells God exactly why he bolted. He quotes the famous mercy formula from Exodus verbatim. He says, "I knew that you were a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love." His decision to run was fully reasoned out the exact instant he got the command.
So crazy enough, Jonah's problem was actually that he believed God too accurately. Think about that for a second. The guy had perfect theology. He could literally see the whole arc before it even happened. He preaches, the city repents, and God forgives them, and he absolutely hated that idea. He wasn't fleeing the prophetic task itself. He rejected the mission precisely because he knew for a fact God would forgive his enemies, and he fundamentally refused to consent to that mercy. And his geographic movements brilliantly illustrate this sheer rebellion. 2 Kings tells us Jonah is from Gath-Hepher, a town up in Galilee. God tells him to go to Nineveh, which is roughly 500 miles inland over on the Tigris River. But what does Jonah do? He goes to the port of Joppa and buys passage on a ship bound for Tarshish. Now, Tarshish was at the far western end of the known world, likely modern-day Spain. So he isn't just ignoring the call. He is physically buying a ticket to run in the absolute opposite direction. But the author doesn't just have Jonah running away horizontally, he shows him running vertically. Long before Jonah ever hits the water, the Hebrew text obsessively repeats the word yarad, meaning descent. It's this continuous plunging motif. He goes down to Joppa, he goes down into the ship, and then he goes down into the hold. The whole first half of the book is just one continuous going down, well before the storm even hits. Now, what's incredibly interesting here is the striking textual asymmetry. When he finally does end up in the water, when Jonah describes his descent in chapter 2, we get this highly detailed, multiverse spatial narration. I mean, he's describing currents, breakers, seaweed wrapping around his head, sinking all the way down to the roots of the mountains. But his ascent? It's a stark single clause. "But you, Lord my God, brought my life up from the pit." It's essentially an unwitnessed ascent. The descent is observed in vivid detail because he was conscious for it, while coming up is reported as something actively done to him. And that vocabulary, "from the pit," that's Sheol, grave vocabulary. It is literal resurrection language. Which brings us to probably the most misunderstood character in the whole story, the giant fish. When you track the actual sequence of events, something amazing stands out. God didn't send the fish straight at a fleeing Jonah. God sent the storm first. When the sailors cast lots and figured out Jonah was the cause, Jonah offered himself overboard to save them. And wonderfully, that actually resulted in the sailors sacrificing and vowing to the Lord, the very first Gentile conversion in the book. So this sequence means the fish wasn't the punishment at all. It was actually appointed as a rescue vehicle to save him from drowning. So after 3 days and nights, Jonah is deposited on dry land, and the word of the Lord comes to him a second time. This time, he actually heads to his destination, Nineveh. But we have to understand, this isn't just some random ancient city. The text is building upon a deeply rooted ancestral narrative that stretches all the way back to the book of Genesis. If we flip back to Genesis chapter 10, the text explicitly links the founding of Nineveh directly to the immediate post-flood generations. There's this fascinating translation fork in the Hebrew where it reads either that Nimrod went out and built Nineveh or that Asher did. But honestly, either way you read it, it places the founding of Nineveh right out of the Babel cluster. It makes the city a direct expansion project of the Tower of Babel generation. So why does a historical link even matter? Well, think about what happened at Babel. God scattered the languages so they couldn't understand each other, right? Yet here we have Jonah, a post-Babel prophet, delivering a purely oral, single-voice broadcast into a Babel lineage city. Nothing is written down. He just walks in and speaks. And it flawlessly lands. It is completely understood across the Babel language divide. It's as if the broadcast system is just completely overriding the scattering of languages. And the absolute genius of the text is what that message actually was. For a massive, sprawling city, you probably expect this long, fiery, complex sermon, right? But Jonah's entire prophetic payload was exactly 5 Hebrew words. Od 40 yom v'Nineveh nahapekit. 40 days and Nineveh will be overthrown. That's it. That is the whole message. But we've got to look closer at that final word, nepachet, because it is absolute literary genius. It comes from the root verb hapak, and it's a brilliant linguistic double entendre. On one hand, it's the exact same verb used in Genesis for the destruction of Sodom, meaning to be physically overturned or destroyed. But on the other hand, it equally means to be turned around, changed, or transformed. Those 5 words guarantee the prophecy comes true whether the city burns to the ground or whether the city repents. What this really means is that the final outcome wasn't rigidly encoded into the prophet's words alone. It was a mechanism entirely dependent on the hearers. One broadcast, 2 possible receptions. It's a great reminder that outcomes aren't always just dictated to us. Sometimes they are mechanisms that depend on our voluntary consent to change. And beautifully enough, from the king all the way down to the livestock sitting in sackcloth, they chose to transform. They chose that second meaning of nepachet, and God relented. Stepping back for a second, we also see this brilliant thematic echoing connecting all of this to a much older story. The name Jonah literally translates to dove. He's Jonah, son of Amittai, which means dove, son of truth. This acts as a direct typological link to Noah's post-flood dove. Think about it. A dove is sent out over the waters, spends time in a sealed vessel, and is deposited on dry land to carry a message. Plus, Jonah gives Nineveh a 40-day grace window, which perfectly mirrors the 40 days of flood rains in Noah's time. Jonah is essentially the dove that didn't return, sent straight to a city born from the flood's survivors. So Nineveh is saved, but all these historical clues and linguistic tricks lead up to the most shocking part of the whole book, the ending. Jonah is absolutely furious that his 5-word sermon actually worked. So he goes outside the city to pout. God appoints a plant to give him shade, then a worm to destroy the plant, and a scorching wind to just make him miserable. Jonah gets so angry about this plant dying, and God asks Jonah a question about extending mercy. And then the text just stops, completely unresolved. Jonah never says a single word back. Mid-conversation, the book is just over. Here is that final question God asks. He says, "You cared about a plant you didn't grow, so should I not care about Nineveh, a great city of 120,000 people who don't know their right hand from their left?" By leaving Jonah's answer totally blank, the author does something incredible. The story turns into a mirror. It drops this massive, unanswered question directly into your lap. The key falls right out of Jonah's story and into yours. Will you begrudge grace when it goes to people you don't like, or will you give your voluntary consent to mercy?